Hello, everybody, and welcome to PGS Moving Image. I'm your host, and today we have with us my wing girl, Reina Creole. Reina, how are you today?
I am doing great, and so glad, as always, to be back here on the Burnettwork with you.
Yes. And guys, this is another episode of PGS Moving Image where we look at a particular IP and talk about its cinematic legacy, and why or what is it about it that keeps us coming back to it. And this week we're going to be talking about The Conjuring. And I have to tell you guys, it came out in 2013 and it was just kind of took everybody by storm. This supernatural horror film, directed by James Wan and written
Mhm.
by Chad Hayes and Carrie Hayes. Obviously, one of the things that was so amazing about it is how much money, Lorena, The Conjuring has made. The film only cost $20 million to make, but it banked $300 million, Lorena.
Mhm.
Wow, that's an incredible amount of money for a film to make. And of course, it was followed by two more films, which kind of rounded out in a kind of trio, if you will, The Conjuring Part Two and The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. And I've got to tell you, Lorena, the film was nominated, practically all three of them were nominated for awards. It's a very unique cinematic IP in the sense that you also have these incredible actors who are in it, mainly Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who play
Mhm.
Ed and Lorraine Warren. They're paranormal investigators. And it's just so incredible how much money overall the franchise, just with those three films alone, have grossed over $1 billion, one of the most successful horror franchises out there. And
Mhm.
something for horror films, there's all different types of horror films that we have today. Like who would have guessed the Blair Witch Project would have been so popular with the Discovery film and Discovery horror films, all different styles of films. But when I think about The Conjuring, a lot of words come to mind. And, certainly things like eerie, terrifying, spooky atmosphere, demonic possessions, exorcisms, and murder are just some of the themes The Conjuring touches upon. It clearly goes beyond your basic haunt, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
But it doesn't come across as overly complicated. In your own words, how would you describe the Conjuring cinematic IP looking at those first three films?
How would I describe it? I would describe it as the most interesting ghost story that turns out to not be a ghost story. That's probably the best way that I can put it. One of the horror movies that fascinated me the most as a kid, so much that I read the novel, was the Amityville Horror, because it's like it's not, the just the ghost knocking around on the door. No, 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 no. This is a spirit that wants you out of their house. And it's just like, why? And there's a story. There's always, if there's a ghost, there's a story. So with the Warrens, they did so many cases. We're just like, how many stories is there? And with The Conjuring, they start out in the crawl telling you that this case was so disturbing that it wasn't broached until now. Now, I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know how much of that is, hey, if we write that in the, we put that in the crawl, hey, that's going to grab people to come in. But that's exactly what it is. There's so many stories. There's so many tentacles around it. There's so many I will say vectors, so to speak, of vectors of interest. With the Conjuring, you have, like, there's the music box that you have. You see the collection of items that the Warrens have, and it very much kind of reminds me of oh gosh, not dang it, I want to say Tales from the Dark Side. in a
Okay.
way, if you remember that, because there were,
Yes.
you see like all these curious objects and everything, and you want to know what all the stories are behind those objects. So you see the doll and you're just like, but it should be just a nice plaything. And the fact that clothes behind glass do not open, they bless it, priest blesses it, twice a month. We're just like, what the heck is going on? But again, it's a simple story of a family is being terrorized to death by a force that they do not understand. And we want to understand what that is. It's just that we have to know, we got to know, And it's just subtle things that keep us hooked, the door opening slightly, the story opening where these young kids are talking about, yeah, the doll, we like had it in one place, then it was another place. Then when there's another place, we're like, oh heck no, you need to get out of there. That's all you need to do. Items that move, the television clicking on, little subtle things, like that. There's so much in this that keeps you hooked, because the overall question we want to know is why. And every little thing that they put in the Conjuring builds up on why, and then splinters out in a bunch of other directions too.
Absolutely. And you touched on so many good points there. And you talked about the television, and the first thing that I thought about, a film that we were absolutely captured by in the 80s, was Poltergeist.
Yes.
And who couldn't forget the little girl in front of the television, kind of, you know, uh, in contact with the TV, and you realized that something was not right, unfortunately. But certainly it was something that you couldn't help but associate here. Um,
Hmm.
and we did mention, and you mentioned that this is kind of based, maybe not exactly, but quite a bit on these real life cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are these supernatural investigators, paranormal investigators.
Hmm.
And honestly, it is very, very creepy to even talk about. Certainly, what's so fascinating about this thing for me is the level of danger that we see, Lorena. It's incredibly dangerous. This is one of those particular cases where time and time again, the Warrens keep putting themselves in so much danger. Um, and we kind of see the danger in a number of ways. We realize that even approaching it is dangerous. They think about it, they, whether or not they have a vision or a dream or whatever it is, or they see the danger around people around them, they're exposed to that. What do you think drove them to fight back against this danger, Lorena? Because I don't know what the solution could have been if there was any alternative, but gee, they really did put themselves out there. What do you think was one of the motivations, at least in the film, from what we can see? They said they want to help, but I have a feeling it's even more than that. Do you think there's anything else to why they feel they have to fight back?
I would say so. I look at the Warrens as paranormal superheroes. That's
I
kind of
like
like the
that.
way that I look
Really
at them.
like that.
Yeah, one of cool. So thanks. So one of the I would say one of the most simplest struggles in literature is the battle between good and evil. And that's what we see here. And that's actually something that I believe Richard Morin quotes. You have a quote from him at the end of the story that evil isn't gone. You have to be vigilant, against that. So we see that their motivation, they want to help, but they also want to help vanquish the evil that they see and the evil that is torturing people. So it's kind of like twofold. They it's like they want to help because like in the first Conjuring movie, that you saw, the Warrens were very reluctant to help. Richard did not want his wife really to help. It's like, what happened last time. And we didn't know quite the specifics, but whatever it was, it shook him to his core, to the point where he was just like, no, I can't lose you like that. And woman comes up and she's pleading. She's just like, we don't know what to do. And she says, your mother just like I am. What would you do if this was your daughter? And she's just like, okay, we'll come in. We'll come and see her because you can see Lorraine wants to help. She does, but her husband's like, no, 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 no. But yeah, overall, they're paranormal superheroes, is what they are, fighting against evil. That's like it in a nutshell. And I think that's what's so attractive to people looking at this franchise.
Yeah, I absolutely love that term, paranormal superhero. It certainly is, I think, a title, at least in the cinematic IP, that the Warrens do wear proudly. They don't have the cloaks on, but they got those cool 1970s, outfits on that
And
really
the gear.
That's right. We get to see them with, cassette tapes and things like that, and putting bells on doors. And it does feel really good to see this era. And I think I do have one question about that. But in the movies, Lorena, the Warrens are constantly being challenged in their legitimacy. It comes to a point where, there are these academics and even anybody who says, I've proven you guys you're fakes. I don't care. And they have to constantly come out. And, you can see how Ed is really just annoyed at this point of having to constantly defend themselves. And Lorraine is like, well, it just comes with the territory. What effect do you think this had on their work, Lorena? And did it put them at a disadvantage for fighting, such a strong opponent, this evil entity often that they wanted to defeat?
That's interesting. And I was calling him Richard instead of Ed. Lord, they're
No,
all starting to go together.
sure Ed. It is, and I apologize. Yeah, it's Ed, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We're cool. We're good.
Okay, good. Um, they're going to be challenged. Let's go to another franchise briefly. Ghostbusters. No one wanted to believe that all of this paranormal activity was happening. No one wanted to believe that. You're fakes, you're phonies, you're ripping people off, for their money, which is a very logical point that certain people would come from. And I think for the Warrens, it's just like, how can you explain what it is that we've seen, that we've documented, that we have witnesses that say? Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, when we put this evidence up there in front of you? Because I think one of the best things that they had, or I would say pieces of evidence that they had, you saw this, is when they were showing in, I think it was Super 8. I want to say it's Super 8 format that they were showing,
Uh-huh.
an exorcism that was going on. And as soon as they shut that off and said any questions, you just saw a sea of hands just shoot up. It's like they couldn't even get out of the room, far enough. But I also think that also plays into part of the audience viewing it, the skeptics. Like, how can we believe that this is really going on? How are you going to get me to believe that this family is being haunted? How are you going to get me to believe that you can actually be the ones, to help? So as for it affecting its work, I'd say it's like a healthy dose of skepticism, so to speak, of having them challenged, because that's something that would happen um, in reality, because it's a familiar trope. Like the hero is just like, I'm trying to get people to believe me, and they're saying that I'm fake and all of that. Again, the Warrens are the paranormal superheroes. They're the underdogs. They have to continually prove their case. So I think it bodes really well for them.
I agree, and I think it is very interesting when we look at the film in that regard, and you can't help but look at this entire franchise without focusing on the two leads: Patrick Wilson, who plays Ed, and Vera Farmiga, who plays his wife. I think between the two of them, she playing Lorraine, he playing Ed, they have the most incredible chemistry, Lorena, that I've ever seen. And I think that the casting also in these films, we also see in the first one, I'm trying to remember the actress's name. She's just an absolute fantastic actress, Lily Taylor, who I'm sure you've seen in a lot of films through the years. But we don't see her in everything, but she seems to be able to do horror so incredibly well. Very special style films that she does. And Vera and Patrick both have done other films, have had success outside of this franchise, but the chemistry between the two of them here is undeniable. It was a slam dunk with the casting. So I also have to give credit to the cinematic IP for putting together two people who work seamlessly together. They look like they can read each other's minds. Lorena, it's really very cool that they found that in these two actors, because you kind of needed to see specific things about a horror franchise that have to be believable. We have to believe that they're together, and we also needed to continually see them in the next few films, where they're still together. If that wasn't there, knowing how much she talked about how, I found somebody who believed in the things that I saw or felt the same way and I married them, it wouldn't have the same level of legitimacy in the series, I think. So this is one case where having these same actors, at least in the first three, really kind of solidifies how view these supernatural superheroes, as you coined them, Lorena. And you and I have seen the popularity of Ghost Hunters. How many years? 20 years has this show
Oh my
been
gosh.
on? It's been on a long time. And I have watched plenty of episodes where nothing was seen, Lorena. I've spent I've had it on the background. I'm like, oh, they didn't find anything. Okay, I'll see you next week. I have. Yeah, I watched it, and and I kind of like, oh, you're watching Ghost Hunters, and it's kind of like almost like a guilty pleasure almost. They put on the I guess the negative view of this, not negative, but it's like a negative. So in opposed to the areas are white or black and black or white, so you see
Mhm.
like all different things. Like they've got the heat vision and
Yeah.
all these different things. They're like, oh, the pedometer, and it kind of feels like they're going old school with this sort of ghost hunting thing. But we also had another film, Paranormal Activity, which was a huge hit.
Yes.
But what I noticed is that while Paranormal Activity was popular, the Blair Witch was popular, some of the sequels to them and to some other horror genres did not resonate and have the success that the Conjuring sequels have had. Why do you think the Conjuring sequels seem to have just keep getting better and better?
I think because they have so much material um, to pull from. You have the Warren cases, of course, to pull in information from. It's like it's a new case, it's a new place. What's going to happen? Because if I remember correctly, the second one was about a family that was in the UK and how far away that and oh, that one was it oh man, it was so different because in the first one, and yeah, I'm going to spoil it a little bit for you guys. You see it in the trailer. In the first one, it was after the mother. The second one, you saw basically one of the kids get possessed. Or just like, oh, okay, we didn't see this last time. And it's like, I did not expect that. And you had the Warrens, but not in their home country. So
Mhm.
there were other things that they had to do. And you're just like, how are they going to be able, how they're going to be able to do that? And then in the third one, a case that they were working on and they were trying to figure out where the heck did that particular demon go. Turns out it went into one of the people that was there. I mean, it's just it's I want to call it genius, but that's kind of like the connection, familiar yet it's different, but makes sense because they're just elevating it each time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just like the first film, the second film, Conjuring Part Two, cost around $40 million to make, but ended up making $321 million, Lorena. And of course, followed by the third film, which cost $40 million to make, but banked $206 million, putting pretty
Yep.
much what they made in the $1 billion range, which
Hmm.
I don't think anybody could have figured they would make that much coin, but it certainly does make you notice. The second film, Lorena, in particular, I remember seeing the advertisement for it, and just really thinking to myself, thinking about this Conjuring universe, so to speak. And they do kind of weave in a lot of other stories. And you and I are focusing on the first three films, but there are other spin-offs like The Nun, Annabelle, which
Hmm.
is one of the dolls in the story. And what also I think was very interesting is that throughout this entire series, and you and I did ask you about how Lorraine and Ed are constantly challenged their legitimacy, but in this particular series, this kind of fear factor that they have um, assumes, and no part do any of us not assume that these demons are real. So this is something that I think is interesting, because there's sort of this outside group of people who are saying, no, it didn't really happen. You guys don't know what you're talking about. But for the viewer, this is real. It's real. And I think that when you go into watching the film and when you leave the film, you still have that same sentiment. And I wondered whether the idea, or creating the idea, that demons actually exist, whether that idea makes the horror even more intense when we experience watching The Conjuring.
I would say so, because when you talk about a ghost, it just seems more of like an annoyance, and it's not really there. We don't know if it's there or not. When you talk about an actual demon, that's something that religions around the world talk about. Um, I remember my grandmother telling me, I was like, "Do you believe in ghosts?" She's like, "I do not believe in ghosts, but I do believe in demons.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the devil is real, then God is real also." I remember her saying that. So that is like on a whole different, a whole different level. So it's, again, it kind of makes things, very unsettling. A lot of people think about like images that you see, rendered and things like that. It's, again, at a different level. It's not like an annoying haunting. You have this force that is looking to take over someone. I'm trying to remember which movie that it was with Denzel Washington
Mm-hmm.
in it. And I cannot remember this, but he was actually fighting against a demon that was switching who it was possessing. And this one scene where Denzel's trying to find out who
Is
it
it The Little
is.
Things?
Which one?
The Little Things?
No, it's
Fallen?
was it Fallen?
American supernatural thriller film. It
It
was
may have been. Yes, it was. Yes,
amazing.
yes, yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was
Okay.
Fallen. It was Fallen. It had that same type of thing, sentiment that we were talking about when you're talking about demons, and they're like, oh my God, they're real. The audience totally buys into it, that it is real. So yeah, that's like a fundamental part. It's different. It's not, again, like I say, I keep repeating this, but it's not like your general haunting kind of ghost story or anything like that. No, no,
Yeah,
it's
and
different.
I'm sorry. Yes, I agree with you, Lorena. It isn't your general haunt. It is much more intense experience that they're asking you to accept, and we gladly accept it for a number of reasons. And I'm not necessarily going to go into isn't the sound quality great and isn't the cinematography great. They are all fantastic in this film. I think it's
Oh
almost
yeah.
flawless, and we see just incredible things that are amazing. And I'm going to talk about Lorraine's visions in a second, but before I get to that, Lorraine, Reina, you and I both know that sometimes the horror film that you think you're going to watch um,
Mhm.
isn't what we think it's going to be about. For example, one example I think, which is the maybe the perfect one, is Cabin in the Woods. You start
Yeah.
a cabin in the woods. It's I'm not going to say what it is for people who haven't seen it, but let's just say it's not just about a cabin in the woods.
No.
And so, you're kind of like thrown this curveball, which is very interesting. And I think it's very interesting in a sense because there is this problem solving idea behind the Conjuring franchise where the Warren team investigates, they plan some sort of counterattack, and then they go ahead and defeat the apparition. And I think that it's very satisfying to the viewer to see that not only, are they here and committed to this stuff, but they are putting their best foot forward to make sure that they have success. And the idea that these things could be defeated is also something that I think a lot of people really like. And so a lot of this is based, although not solely, a lot of it is based on the visions that Lorraine has. And we do learn in the series that they have to get proof sometimes to go back to the church, and the church can get
Yeah.
involved and quasi involved in the church, and they're like, well, we'll help you out, but we need to see something. And Lorraine and of course Ed are like, okay, well, let's do that. And you mentioned how concerned he is about his wife, and she's concerned about him a lot of times. But
Mhm.
the core, a lot of what happens is the Lorraine's ability to see, locate, and communicate, and also be terrified by her own visions. She gets these visions, she sees it, she sees the whatever it is, and she herself is freaked out. um what do you think about the approach of showing that even the paranormal investigator is terrified of what they are seeing?
I think it's a vulnerability and an imperfection that we like to see in our heroes. We don't want our heroes being, perfect. Like, hey, nothing scares me. A lot scares these people. But then again, courage and bravery is basically you're scared to death, but you do it anyway. You press on anyway. The fact that the rain not only sees these visions, but you'll see like these apparitions, like in The Conjuring, when she actually sees. I mean, we see it for a split second, and it's like, what are you looking at? What are you looking at? And she sees the body that's hanging, and she's just like
Yes. Oh my
something.
gosh, that was incredible.
Absolutely. It was like split second.
Yes.
And it's like, what are you looking at? And look, we don't see anything. But she's still looking. So we know she's still looking at it. And you look, you notice the tree is dead, and you see that particular body hanging from the tree. So that when you see those feet later on, you know exactly who it is. And then when she goes into the crawl space,
Yeah.
and she finds the rope. So she found like the noose that was there. And she just
It's like the
starts.
biggest darn rope you've ever seen in your life. You're like, what?
It was insane. And
Yeah.
she starts freaking out and screaming. I'm like, who wouldn't when you see this stuff? It's like it's a very human reaction. I don't think that we would buy into that if she didn't. If she wasn't shaken or frazzled or just downright so scared out of her mind that she's running to the phone and you know trying to figure out what's going on. I do like that part. I do like it that some of this stuff it's like, come on now. If you saw something like that, oh please, I will be screaming to high heaven too.
And it is very interesting. You and I are talking about how she's reacting to these visions that she has, and she's known for these visions. And some of the
Mm.
scariest ones, you mentioned, that one really freaked me out in The Conjuring, where the person was hanging near that lake. That really freaked me out, just like you. And also the one where she visits the family in England, and she tells them, she says, well, I've seen something, entity that's attached itself to you all along. And I'm like, what? And like they go back and they show you where it's literally holding on to them. And that was creepy. And they really make a lot of cool creepy scenes in it where, it's got this atmosphere, and it does feel very, gothic, really from beginning to end. And I am going to say the production design of it, the art direction, certainly the practical effects crews, along with some incredible sound and lighting, have done wonderful jobs in this film. Certainly, it contains a lot of that atmospheric terror that we're thinking about. And a
Mhm.
lot of times, the victims, because they are victims who fall prey to these demonic possessions, if you will, really are just ordinary people. There's nothing to distinguish them that's different, other than being, let's say, in the wrong place at the worst time. Let's say, in one
Mhm.
case, where the family was at a place where someone was a witch, and kind of reminiscent of some stories we've heard in the past. But what I think is really interesting is that the film doesn't feel fabricated or necessarily made up. It's not necessarily made up. It's based on investigations. Why does the
Mhm.
series feel so homemade?
I have to say a lot of it has to do with, I want to say, how they recreate the time period in which they're in. So it cannot look super slick the way it does today. It can't look like it's, in 4K HD unless it's upscaled that way, but still, it needs to have that gritty feel to drop us into that period of time. So you can't have a lot of super flashy effects unless they're transformation and makeup effects, which is obviously essential, to a horror film. So I think the fact that it doesn't look clean. That's like the only way that I can describe it. It feels like that particular time period, from the cars, from the clothes, to even how things are shot. It just is. You don't see like a lot of, digitized ghosts running around. You don't see that. You see doors opening. You see apparitions that show there physically. So I think that's a great part of it, and also part of the genius in keeping the cost, even the cost down, because why would you really why would you really need that? Um, and in a way, to portray the visions that are going on. Like, for example, when they have all the equipment set up to take pictures when there's some kind of disturbance going on or movement that you can't see to the naked eye, that's not like special effects. You see those cameras going off and the light bulbs going off. It's not a special effects thing. It's a physical thing that you see, and they weave it into the storyline where they're just like, they're saying, like, is she possessed? They're like, no, there's somebody with her. Notice how the flashes are going off. She would pass, and then I was like, oh my god, I didn't even freaking notice that before. But it sucks. That's one of the things that sucks you in, and it looks so, again, realistic and in that particular time period. So I think it's great. I love how they did it. I think if it was super slick, I would not really pay that much attention to it. That's why Paranormal Activity was so good.
Hmm. And let's talk about the totems, Lorena, which are, as many of you know already, these vessels that hold the entities. Um,
Mhm.
and the Warrens have decided that it's better for them to keep excuse me, totems containing the entities. Maybe it doesn't contain them, but let's just say that at some point, and they keep them in a very spooky den in their house. Um, how do you feel, Lorena, knowing that their innocent daughter will be staying or living, maybe, or near, sometimes exposed in the same place where these totems are?
It couldn't be me. It could not be me. With the Warrens keeping all that stuff together, which I have heard about the Warren Museum, that is very unsettling. Because when they find, when they hear something walking around, or just like, oh my God, there's something loose in the room, and it turns out that is their daughter, and he's just like, no, I told you you can't playing here. I'm thinking a kid is curious. They are going to go in there if if you don't have it locked. I'm just like, why would you do that? And of course, Ed's like, well, we would rather have them here where we know where they are than out there and we don't know where they are. So it's it's extremely unsettling, even though we know that they're good at what they do. But it's just like, how is that? How is that? Kind of growing up having that there and around, and in the first movie, seeing how Annabelle manages to get out.
Yeah. It is something to think about, and I think that, I guess at some point there had to be another vulnerability, as you mentioned, Lorena, because there is a certain level of responsibility that they take by keeping these totems so close to where they are and kind of being the watch, the keeping watch over them,
Hmm.
and realizing the importance of doing that. My thought was that could you burn them, but we see that you can't throw them away. They're not that type of thing. And we are seeing time and time again in these um, particular movies that the Warrens, they are deeply in love. And
Yes.
we see them putting themselves in harm's way, but also sacrificing their time in order to kind of get through all this stuff away from family and friends, so to speak. Um,
Hmm.
I think that seeing their perseverance and resolve, what do you think that tells us about the Warrens and how they view themselves and their time sort of in society and their role in society, which pretty much was undefined at that time? Does that perseverance and resolve tell us how they view themselves and their place? Because I think it would be very hard to figure out what you're supposed to be doing, even if you do have the right tools. We even see them kind of backtrack in one film where they're like, "Oh, we're out of here," and then they come back. What do you think about the fact that it's not a certain science, so to speak? It's not a something that they do with absolute perfection all the time.
That is an excellent question. Um, ag- Again, it goes back to making the characters imperfect so that we can relate to them. For example, the doctor who gets that patient he can't save, you know, the patient that dies on the table and he does everything possible and it doesn't, and it doesn't work. It, it humanizes them to us. And when you were talking about like their place in society, I think the fact that they have each other, that they believe in each other, and they believe in what they're doing, regardless of, like, say if they're skeptics or anything like that. I think that's where a lot of their strength comes from and why we admire them so much, because it's like it takes some serious guts to come out and say there is no logical explanation for this. There's a demonic explanation for this. And I'm going to tell you why. It takes some guts to come out and say something like that. And they have each other to back each other up. If no one else believes them, they believe each other. And I'm pretty sure, considering that their daughter is living in the middle of that, yeah, she's just like, I understand, you know, completely too. What the heck's going on?
And it is interesting. The daughter does kind of get involved in this. She can't help but be involved in this, because her parents are so deeply involved in this. And
Hmm.
we see circumstances where the mother has visions while the daughter is there. And
Yes.
are we to assume, and I don't know whether it's true or not, that the daughter also has these visions?
That is an excellent question. And for some reason, and I can't tell you why, I think that she does. Um, or maybe I'm confusing that with the black phone. For some reason, and for some reason, I think that she does. Um, in a way, I can't remember if it was explained completely or if there was kind of like notions of it, but I'm trying to remember if it was it in the second one? Or, no, it had to be in the third one. It had to be in the third one, where she's sitting there like with her daughter, and I think they were in the hallway or something like that. And she's like, Mommy, what? Yeah, now I remember. She's like, Mommy, what's that? And she's like, what are you talking about? She's like, who's that? And they can both see that particular demon that's there. So that's why I'm saying I think they hinted at it, but it wasn't like called out explicitly. So it kind of made you wonder, oh, does she have the same, is she capable of having the same visions, as her mother? And I just thought that that was so darn freaky because she's like trying to write in a Bible and she's like in the middle of a mission trying to figure it out. And she thought that her daughter was going. It was so trippy. But yeah, I think they hinted at it, but they just hadn't like explicitly said. They may be saving that for another Conjuring movie. Actually, if you ask me, would have been smart for them to do that.
Absolutely, Lorena. And, you and I did mention during this broadcast that the movies are set during a different time period, 70s and I guess going into the 80s. And, I almost wondered whether because of the time period where most people didn't know anything about this topic, there was no ghost hunters on TV, there was no
Mm-mm,
paranormal activity, nothing like this. The Exorcism, I think, was made in the 70s, the movie, but generally people
mm,
didn't, necessarily understand all the elements like they know about things like this today, where you can go ahead and do a query and find out, or go to, that these things exist. So in the context of 1970, where people didn't know all these details, do you think that there was a greater level of fear, just even in the context alone of that time period, of what happens in The Conjuring, solely because people are overall ignorant of that this can even happen?
I think so. When they hinted upon that in the first Conjuring movie, where you saw them feature the Helter Skelter murders, and they were just like, we don't see, stuff like that. And that's when they were talking about satanic rituals and etc. And it wasn't something that people really knew about, which is why people were so shocked at that, happening. For some people, that was like the first time that they'd heard of anything like that occurring. So you're right. There was a lot of ignorance at the time about that because it was so hush hush. But now all of a sudden, it was out in the open and people didn't know what to do about it. And you're right. Yes, there was a lot of fear. Sharon Tate. I think it was Sharon Tate. Her murder and how it happened, that, oh my gosh, that had so much press and so many people scared to death.
Absolutely. And, obviously that type of occurrence, in modern day, we have a different reporting system, but we also have different society and different things that people are doing that they wouldn't have done 20, 30 years ago. So the
Right.
world has changed quite differently in regards to what we see as sort of a baseline, if you will. And so that is something that I think is very interesting. But also the idea that because of this ignorance, there's a lot that they don't know. So therefore, it becomes even more terrifying. Um,
Hmm.
and another thing too that is does set it apart, I think, as we're kind of going to wrap this up, is that it isn't just people who are getting possessed, but also objects as well.
Yes.
So you have these two things that happen, but they're very clear. Some of the other things you're expecting to see and experience could be, voices or smells or temperature, light. And
Hmm.
I think something that really pushed it to the edge, although it's been criticized in The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, was that when we went outside of Lorraine and Ed's point of view, and now got to see someone else's point of view who is experiencing this. And I thought it was an interesting twist, although there was a criticism about the actual screenplay not being as strong.
Hmm.
I thought it was very interesting because I'm glad that they didn't go ahead and have the character claim, well, this happened first and this happened second and this happened third. And I said that would be kind of pointless, because part of the horror was that he couldn't understand or didn't realize he was being manipulated. And I really thought that that was such a unique element to it. Of course, in the third film, The Devil Made Me Do It, it was
Mhm.
the first American murder trial to claim demonic possession. And of course, could you use that as a defense and things like that? And of course, the most obvious part of it is that he was witness to this exorcism of a family member. And
Mhm.
he does something that puts him in harm's way. And of course, it's incredibly dangerous. Even without putting yourself in harm's way, this is dangerous. But I thought that what made it so clever is that there were elements in the film or parts where you thought you knew what was going on, Lorena. And then the next thing, that scene where he thinks that guy is dancing with his girlfriend, only to find out that it wasn't what he thought at all. And I thought that that was very clever. And they didn't have to show that. They could have just showed it, let's say, from an omniscient observer. Instead, they made you feel like you were the person who was experiencing this thing. Lorena, it was absolutely terrifying. I didn't know what was happening for a good portion of that, although they did imply what you would be seeing in the film. They didn't keep that a secret. But Lorena, were you expecting that level of chaos for the victim in The Devil Made Me Do It?
I'll say yes and no. And here's why. It's like, okay, the devil made me do it. I'm like, okay, well that sounds like an excuse. So somebody's
Yes.
planning to use that as an excuse. I wasn't expecting, I guess, the perspective that they use to tell the story. I thought, like you were saying, we're kind of like this omnipotent observer. We're again like on the outside looking in, just like with the previous two Conjuring movies. This one, they flipped the script on us. So that feeling of powerlessness was just something else. Again, a an interesting trick that they did play. Yeah, I didn't think the third one was as strong as the previous two, but it's like the third one, so sometimes they kind of take their foot off the gas a little bit. But I did think that that was very interesting that they did that instead of us from the outside looking in, we're like on the inside looking out. So I thought that was pretty smart of them to do.
Yeah, it really was. And we have that amazing scene where they're trying to find the body of one of the victims. And of course, in some of these areas that this movie takes place, it can be in rural places where there can be thousands and thousands of wilderness miles. And
Hmm.
people may not even trek into some of the more rural areas. And that might be the case in this one where often we see the Lorraine character is witness to what has happened in the past in her visions as well. And here this happens where she's literally on the edge of a cliff, Lorena. And it's just unbelievable how, thank goodness she didn't go any further
Hmm.
because it would have affected her life as well.
Right.
They do delve a little bit into the church and what happens with certain vows that certain members take and the effect that that has, and we do see a little bit more intertwining in that film versus the other two from what happens in the storyline. But I think it is very interesting, like you said, Lorena, when we do hear people say the devil made me do it, and of course you're like, well, that's just an excuse. But in this case, they're trying to pretty much convince you that that's what's happened in this case. Did they convince the viewer, or did this film fall short?
I think they barely did it. I think they kind of squeaked it over the line. It's been a while since I've seen the film, but I do know that at the end I was kind of like, okay. It seemed like they just barely were able to kind of prove that. I think it was just a risk that they decided to take, which didn't pay off 100%. I feel like they just eked it out, you know, at at the end. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was expecting like some seriously crazy demon possession to go on in court. That's what I was expecting to see. And did not really see that happen. So,
Yeah, and something that I thought was interesting is that in this particular case, someone falls victim to trying to summon something, and they can't do it, and then all of a sudden they're kind of taken advantage of. We kind of see that in, I think it might be the second film, is it the first, second film, where a character is just kind of being used as a pawn. And I wasn't expecting that even a ghost could be used as a pawn in this case. But we
Mm-hmm.
did see that. And the third film is kind of like, what happens when things go really, really wrong? How do you handle that? And I think that that's what that film was. Despite having to deal with the pandemic, and despite having to deal with that, the film still ended up grossing bank, Lorena, which certainly is not bad for $39 million to make
Yeah.
200 million. It's just remarkable what they were able to do. And of course, by this time, the Conjuring series itself has kind of built up a reputation where people do have certain expectations for that. But we are also seeing maybe even a closer connection, if you will, at the end of The Conjuring Part 3, with the daughter and, the mother, and in the artifact room.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is very interesting. And, as you said, it was maybe a little bit of foreshadowing, where the daughter and the mother are kind of standing in the same place and they're seeing the same thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
there is going to be a Conjuring Part 4, Lorena. And of course, we're not surprised by this.
Ooh.
We're not surprised by this. It's in development. Certainly, we are expecting this to happen. So it's no surprise. So there is that. But also, the other thing that I'm thinking to myself is, and we didn't talk about it because we didn't have enough time, but there are spin-off series, as I said, The Nun,
Yes.
which is the prequel,
Mm-hmm.
and also the Annabelle series as well. So it has spawned a lot of additional movies to this particular franchise. And the Annabelle series, I think there's 3 of them. And I have a feeling it could continue to do that. But for me, well, my favorites are the Conjuring ones, which I think really kind of set the tone. And Lorena, do you have any last words you'd like to say about pretty much one of the most successful horror film franchises in our time,
Mm-hmm.
about The Conjuring? Any last thoughts and comments?
I would say that the reason I think The Conjuring is so popular is that it goes back to the roots of classic horror. It's not all about the blood and gore. There is some, but there's a justifiable reason for it happening. They go for more of like the psychological scare that goes on, which is to me even, I would say, like even more intriguing than yeah, blood and guts, there goes another head, there goes, whatever like that. I think that's why they tap into like that classic horror feeling, and I think that's why it's been so popular. And I'll also add this, also a positive depiction of faith as well. So I think with all of those combined is why it's so popular. And again, there's a lot of stuff in that darn artifact room.
Yeah, there
I
is.
don't
Oh my
I
God.
don't think we've seen the one about, the monkey with the symbols. I'm waiting for that one.
Yeah. There are a lot of totems in there, and you're right, Lorena. The Catholic Church is kind of brought quite front and center, although they are not the ones that are sort of the main character. Oftentimes, we see a priest in these films talking to the Warrens,
Hmm.
and they have contact with them, and the Warrens talk about, well, we at the time, I guess maybe he wasn't qualified to do exorcisms, but gee, Lorena, everybody thinks about the Catholic Church when you think about exorcisms, and the church was very different role than it plays now, especially the Roman Catholic Church. I don't know if it's Roman Catholic in the film, maybe it is or maybe it isn't, but I think
I
it might
think
be.
it is. Yeah.
And the church played a very different role at that time in history, in this, during, let's say, the first half of the 20th century was very different than it is now. Well, actually, it's not the first half. The second half of the 20th century was very different role than it is now. And I think it is very interesting. It doesn't necessarily intersect or push away what happens, because they do actually show an exorcism, so to speak. But it doesn't necessarily overshadow or try and take away the importance of the exorcism series, which I think also is a particular series that has its own way of looking at things, in the sense that as a priest who decides to do this, there are certain burdens that you must bear. Here, these are, Lorraine and her husband are not, religious. So they have to do this in a different way. And this is their experience with it. But it certainly is something to, strike up conversation. And I do kind of like that they have the Catholic Church in it. I am Roman Catholic, so there, I put that out there. But I do kind of like it. So, it's very funny. It actually feels somewhat comforting. I know it shouldn't, but maybe that's why it was placed there. I don't know. I think things were placed very specifically in these films to evoke certain emotions. And I think that they're very successful in doing that, in particular, in that case, because we don't want to think about all the other troubles that are going on at the same time in that organization. But Lorena, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion about the Conjuring cinematic IP. What do you think the legacy is, Lorena? And I forgot to ask that. What do you think is the legacy of the Conjuring cinematic IP?
Wow. Particular legacy. I would just say it's just like things are not always what they seem to be. And I would also say that, again, that constant vigilance against evil. Again, we want to see them have that constant vigilance. And I think that's what it is. Again, something shows up, something causes a problem, disturbance. Guess what? They're there to remind people that evil is indeed present, and it's out there. And one last thing, the funny joke that we would always say is like, why is it anytime something happens, the Catholic Church is involved? Because if these were Baptists, we'd just call a revival and have everyone come over to the house and lay hands on them,
Well, I think that there is something to be learned from, taking advice from other religious groups. And, sometimes those suggestions could be the perfect answer to a solution, Lorena. And maybe we'll see something like that in one of the next Conjuring films, because they haven't necessarily gone down that road before.
I would love to see that.
I think it's pretty important because it's a huge amount of American cultural heritage, right? As
Absolutely.
well. So it's something to think about there. Lorena, thank you so much for joining me. And I agree. I think the legacy of The Conjuring is that we are expecting high quality horror films that are going to give us certain elements, but also keep us intrigued for very particular reasons. And I think The Conjuring has done that very successfully, even with their not so great performance in the third one. I think that they still have the potential to continue the series, and people will still show up to the box office.
Oh yeah, we're going to show up.
Absolutely. Lorena, where can people find you?
Well, folks, you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Instagram, and of course, you can find me on YouTube, where I do various videos, live streams, gaming streams, pop culture streams, some just me, a lot with here as well. And of course, you can always also find me on the Burnettwork for ladies of the PGS on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Absolutely, Lorena, guys. You can find me here on Positive Fandom, my channel, although this will air on the Burnettwork, soon to be called Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, as PGS Moving Image, The Conjuring, and the legacy of its cinematic IP, which is still in the process of development because they are making films. But you can also find me on Lorena Creole channels. Please do like and subscribe to her channel as well. And we do a Toxic Male Appreciation show on Lorena's Twitch channel on Thursdays at 5 p.m. But you can also find us on Ladies of the PGS at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Burnettwork. And guys, you can also find me sometimes on the 1/6 Scale Man Network for Uncivilized Scoundrels as
Mm.
well. So guys, please do check me out on all those channels. I just enjoyed doing this so much, Lorena. This has been so much fun to talk about The Conjuring. I think one of the best horror cinematic IPs out there. And guys, no matter where you are in the galaxy, no matter where you're located, always do remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.